Our next speaker, our keynote speaker, is somebody that I've known for about a decade. And many of you know him as the creator of Ransom Old Tom Gin, the first of the new barrel-aged gins made in the United States. And many also know him from his Emerald 1865 whiskey, which is very critically acclaimed and nationally recognized whiskey. But we at ADI know Tad a little differently. He's one of those distillers that fall into this category. And it's really loosely defined, but Bill Owens and I know what each other mean when we say he's the real deal. And Tad really is the real deal. He's one of those guys you go out there and he's always in his rubber boots, and if he's not in his distillery running the flame-fired pot stills, he's out in his vineyard with mud up to his knees pruning his vines. And he's one of those guys who is really hardworking, never takes a break. Made me feel nervous to call him and invite him to be our keynote speaker today. He's one of those people that he's figuring it out from scratch, has been since, when were you founded, Tad? 1998? Seven. Since the last millennium. And he's created some of the examples that the next generation of distillers are following. So I'm grateful he was able to take some time out from his muddy vineyards and come here to speak with us. He is the real deal. Tad Seestedt.
So I have a confession to make before I start speaking, and that is I speak publicly about as often as I wear a suit, which is almost never. And Drew approached me last fall and asked me to take the keynote speech, and I was both honored, humbled, and intimidated at the same time, but I didn't want to say no. Realize opportunities like this don't come up very often, and I'd mentioned to Drew a few of the things that I wanted to talk about, and one is the enormous change that's happened in the industry. The growth has been explosive, but also a lot of recent changes in mostly our marketing environment, and he made me promise to keep the speech positive. So I'll do my best. But just to start it out, I'll give you, I don't want to talk about myself very much, but to give you an idea of what's possible within this industry, and I know that some of you may have been around a long time, and some maybe not as long, and some are just getting started. But in the spring of 1996, I met with the regional director of what was then ATF, and this is a great guy, very knowledgeable. I cut my hair, shaved my beard, sold my Volkswagen bus, and bought a pickup truck, and put on a collared shirt to go to that meeting. And at that point, I had kind of a ragtag assembly of equipment, fermenters, tanks, equipment that was cast off from other industry colleagues who had been around a long time that I fixed. And I had an extremely low budget. And sitting down and talking with, this is Bernie Kipp, if he's out there, good morning, Bernie. But we had a conversation, and my fear was that I would sink everything that I had saved and owned into starting a distillery without knowing if I would get a license. And I just wanted to make sure at that meeting that I stood a decent chance. And Bernie reassured me that as long as I didn't have a record, which I didn't, I would probably get my license. And then he started to talk about money and things that were needed to start a distillery. And I believe the number that he threw out was $1 million. It could have been $100,000, but at that point, I had $11,000 in savings. And so I guess my point is that as I stand here in front of this group, I really believe that anything is possible in this industry. And yes, maybe in the mid-1990s, it was a little bit easier than now, but I do believe that it is still very possible. it's not easy, and I think that, one very important consideration is that we have to log the hours, and as small craft producers, we don't have the resources that many of the larger startups have, whether it's the distilled spirits industry, the wine industry, or the beer industry, but what we have is passion and drive, and that can be harnessed to do incredible things. I know I only have 20 minutes, and Sunday I was going through my notes and I realized I could probably talk for half a day, so I'm going to try to keep this condensed. I think I want to go over some of the challenges, opportunities, and ideas that I have to meet those. And I think one thing that our industry has run up against is the perception that spirits are a demon alcohol. And they're blamed for many of the social ills and damages that are done, as opposed to wine and beer. And I think that as an industry, we need to work together to change that perception. And the mentality of prohibition still exists. And as you know, if you have started a DSP, we have an enormous load of paperwork and regulations to deal with, both at state, federal level. And I know, because I also own a winery, that what I deal with at the winery level is nothing compared to what I deal with at the DSP level. But I think one thing is for sure: if we don't continue to strive to achieve this change, we will be steamrolled, and we need to continue on. I think there'll be a lot of talk. There has been a lot of talk already if you're at the ACSA, and there'll be more seminars on it today. But I think for all of us, our primary focus is on our quality of product and making the best possible spirits and spirits products that we can. And that's the easy part. Production is easy. Once we get to sales and marketing and surviving in a changing economic landscape, that's where the real challenges start. And probably most of you are aware, on the distribution scene, we now have 2 large companies that control 55% of the market as of the last study. It is likely that those 2 large distribution companies in the next year will control significantly greater percentage. And what's happening for us on the craft sector is we are probably not able to attract attention from those distribution companies, and we need to work with smaller and medium-sized distributors. But as the mechanics change on the large scale, it's also affecting the distribution companies on the medium and small end. And some of the medium-sized distributors are trying to grow, move into other markets, and compete with the big players. And I'm speaking from personal experience, so I have 2 or 3 distributors that fit into that role, and they may not make it through their growth phase, which means that the 2 large companies will control an even greater percentage, and the smaller companies that are out there who will support us and sell craft products are getting squeezed. I make some pretty dumb jokes, but hopefully none of my distributors are in the audience today, but one of my jokes is that there are no good distributors, there are only distributors that are less bad. But that's really not true, because there are really good companies to work with, and those small to medium-sized companies are the ones that we need to find in order to continue our growth. And I think one thing that I did want to talk about today, and I know we lean on ADI and Bill and Drew and the crew there a lot, but their resources and the resource section is very helpful for us, and we can help them expand that and look for ways that we as an industry can work together. And although we're seen as being competitive with one another, there's much more to be gained by cooperation. And finding these markets and finding the right people to work with is a prime example of how we can do that. The other thing that I'd like to talk about is diversification in our markets. And what seems to make the most sense as the national and even the international market to some extent become more challenging for us is to look at direct-to-consumer sales, either through our tasting room or being able to ship our products to other states. And that both of those things, depending on where you are pretty difficult. Right now, for us to ship to other states is not impossible, but pretty close. I think, working within our own states, and I'll talk about my friends at the OLCC, and we have differing opinions on some things, and I think Oregon is a control state. And if we look at our store system for small companies like mine and the other small distilleries in this state, it works really well. It's a great setup, and we're able to get our product out to the 270 liquor stores out there. We have to do the legwork to sell, but we have that opportunity. When it comes to direct-to-consumer sales, for our distilleries in state, it's a disaster. So we, depending on the amount of our sales, we will pay between 30 to 40% off the top. So if you're running a retail operation, it's really an impossible and an illogical way to run your business. And after we give our 30 to 40%, we're looking at paying our overhead, our payroll, hopefully benefits for our employees, and then state taxes. And we're trying to change that. And I think this is another resource to work together with ADI on, is for all the states, the distillers guilds, to get together and compare how legislative actions and rules affect their businesses. Some other possibilities are export. I know that sounds crazy to some of the smaller, newer companies, but export can work really well. Now that the FET is lowered, it may not be as big of a difference on savings, but the FET itself will only last for 2 years, maybe less if our makeup of the Congress changes and the tax bill is repealed. But we need to fight to make that permanent. It's an enormous gain for our industry, whether we're small or medium-sized. Other ideas that I have to deal with the challenging marketing landscape are looking at brokerage arrangements, finding a good broker to work in states. And an example for my company is a small control state where half of the population doesn't drink. And we have a great broker. You might be able to guess which state that is. We have a great broker there. And it's in a small state where 1.5 million people drink alcohol. It's one of our best markets. Another thing I think that some of us are looking at is direct partnerships with retail chains. The large retail chains have both a negative and a positive effect on us. If we can establish relationships with them, it's great for our business, and we can move significant amounts of our product without having to go through the distribution system. The downside is that the small boutique retailers are also being squeezed and are having trouble competing with the large retail chains, but there's both good and bad. One thing I definitely want to touch on, and I can talk about my own company, and starting with $11,000 in savings, and the name Ransom is really about the money that I had to put into the business to survive, and leveraging with credit cards money that I couldn't raise from a bank because no banks were giving loans on distilleries 20 years ago. But I think that we need to consider that small, efficient, independent distilleries that are profitable can be a complete success story, and that not all of us may want to grow to either compete with the big producers or to potentially be bought out, and that small size of 2,000 to 5,000 case production, depending on our points of sale, can support multiple families and be sustainable and something that can be passed on from generation to generation. And that to me is a success story. I'm not sure how I am on time. I'll try to get this concluded. One thing that I've run into in the marketplace, and it's not a new thing, but I think it's an aspect of our business that we can't compete with as small producers, and that is the pay to play. which is illegal by federal regulation and, as far as I know, under most state regulatory agencies. And the first time I ran into it, I know there's a few people here from Florida, which may have that reputation, but I had a retailer ask me point blank, how much will you pay me to put your product on the shelf? And it was the first time I'd run into it. I was a little flabbergasted. And I told him, I won't pay you anything, mostly because I don't have it. But if you like my product and you like me and you think it's a quality product, then you should carry it. And I think there are places where we expect that and places that we don't. And I never expected to run into pay-to-play in Oregon and ran into it for the first time about 3 or 4 years ago, and again was caught completely by surprise. So I think the pay-to-play is something that we need to encourage our regulators and our legislators, but mostly our regulators, to focus on and try to create the level playing field that they are charged with creating for us and helping to enforce. Because I wanted to end on a positive note, which I promised, and none of that is negative. I think the point is that we have our work cut out for us, and in addition to logging the hours on our production facilities, there are many other facets of the business that we need to focus on as an industry and raise our voice as small craft producers and ensure that the changes that need to be made are the changes that we are looking for. I think some of the advantages that we have as small producers is that, unlike the past, and I came of age before the internet was created. I'm not sure who created it. Some people take claim, but I've never seen Facebook, and my employees do that, and they do Instagram. But this social media and internet provide a platform for us that it could be low cost if we can do it in-house. It's not always the case, but 20 years ago, and maybe even 10 years ago, that platform didn't exist. And in order to reach people through marketing and advertising, that required enormous amounts of money that virtually no one in the craft sector had. And now we can. And that's something that I think we need to exploit, and the dinosaurs, like myself, need to find other people who can do it for us. I think the real message, I think, amidst all the challenges, is that craft spirits as an industry is here to stay. We're not going anywhere. And there is an enormous percentage of the population that supports what we do, and they're not going to change. If we look at the microbrew industry as an example, they went through several ups and downs over the course of the last probably 20 or 30 years. And the percentage of the population that is now drinking craft beer was probably unimaginable 20 years ago. If you walk into a grocery store, the craft beer section is probably as large as the, large brew section. And, we're not there yet, obviously. If the rules can change regarding alcohol, spirits, perception, and we're allowed to compete and have equality and parity with our beer and wine colleagues, things can change dramatically. That's another fight that we need to keep fighting. But I think I might be near my 20 minutes, so I'm going to wrap it up. And I think the big issue is that we need to push hard to change against the discrimination that we've faced historically. And if we don't do it, no one else will do it for us. And that change may be slow, but we have an opportunity to accelerate that change, and our consumers, the bartenders, buyers, politicians, and our own colleagues should be presented with our position and the hard facts as often as possible. And some of these people we have almost daily contact with. And if we continue to advocate for change, the change will come. If we don't advocate for the change that we want, it is likely that we will get the change that we do not want. So our work is cut out for us, and we can get it done. Thank you.